Whoever eats of this bread will live forever. May I speak in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. What meanest thou by this word sacrament? I mean an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace given unto us, ordained by Christ himself as a means whereby we receive the same. To some of you that will be completely baffling, others of you will remember it. I know that because I've spoken to some of you who learnt your catechism when you were, I don't know, about 8 or something like that. The definition of a sacrament, an outward and visible sign of an inward and visible grace ordained by Christ himself, a means by which we receive the same. I hesitate before reading out definitions in sermons because they can be rather dry, even dusty. We can learn these things, scratch our heads, move on, and continue to live life as though the definition made no difference. So let's try another quotation. I know you'll know this one. God is love, and those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. The first letter of John, chapter 4, second part of verse 16. God is love, and if we live in love, we live in God, and God is alive within us. Those two quotations are different ways of saying the same thing. Think about love for a moment. Love is invisible. How do we know that love is there? Through outward and visible signs. Think for a moment about what such a sign might be. A kiss. A different sort of kiss betokening a different kind of relationship. A friendly kiss on the cheek, a consoling kiss on the brow, the intimate kiss of lovers. A wedding ring is another outward sign of something that is inward and gifted and invisible. Some of us are wearing wedding rings today. We might say that a wedding ring is nothing more than a strip of metal. But the sacramental truth is deeper. It speaks of something invisible, but bigger. And what I normally say, sorry if this is a spoiler for the next wedding you're coming to here, at weddings, to the bride and the groom, the husband and wife-to-be, is this. If love feels like it's a small part of us, we're looking through the wrong end of the telescope. Love is not a small part of us, however it may wax and wane. We are a small part of it. In it, we live and move and have our being. We may not always realize that. Our lives may not always reflect that. But we live and move in love. And if we live and move in love, we live and move in God. For God is love, and God is bigger than us. This may shock you, but the most helpful explanation I ever had of what it means to move in a sacramental world is this story, told by a South American theologian who remembered his dad. He wasn't around when his dad died. Their relationship wasn't perfect. His dad had all kinds of problems, but he was his dad, and therefore he loved him, and in his own way, his dad loved him. When he died, rather suddenly and unexpectedly, when he was somewhere else, his sister sent him some tokens through the post. And these included, this is the astonishing bit, the very last cigarette butt that his father had thrown away. Well, it hadn't been thrown away. He had an aneurysm not long afterwards, and his sister collected it and thought that her brother would appreciate it. Leonardo Boff kept that cigarette butt. It was a meaningful symbol of who his Father was. And it was important that it was that particular cigarette end. Another cigarette end wouldn't do. That was the very last cigarette that his father had smoked. It probably had something to do with his early death, and it spoke and betokened meaning. As I said, human love ebbs and flows. It somehow reflects the divine love, but never perfectly. That would be another sermon in itself, but just think of this for a moment. There's a kind of love that can destroy, and there's a kind of love that can forgive and make new and heal and restore. That's why we need the church. We think we know what love is, but we never really fully know. We come to church, we receive the sacraments to be reminded again and again in an imperfect world about what perfect love looks like and how we, imperfectly, participate in it. If our love is the selfish kind of love that can destroy and overprotect and take life rather than give it, it's just a human kind of love that may feel like a little bit of water swishing around in an empty bucket. If, on the other hand, when, on the other hand, we are able to be enlarged and changed and grow through love, through simple acts of forgiveness and reconciliation and creation and so on, we are participating in the divine being. We are caught up in the life of the God we cannot see. Which brings me on to living flesh. If you've been confirmed, you might have covered this in Sunday school, but here's a refresher, because I know that not everyone is comfortable with the idea, just as the crowd wasn't when he heard Jesus talk about it. First they thought he was being presumptuous, because he was saying he came from heaven, not from his human family, but also because what he was saying sound kind of anti the Jewish religion in ways that I will try to explain. But first of all, let me tell you something else. For the Jewish people then, and now, and also it should be a bit like this for us, memories had a different kind of reality. This was important. If they look back over the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, things went wrong. They went wrong again and again and again. And what the prophets and their good leaders told them was that it was really important that every year, through their seasonal festivities, they did again the things that the people had done thousands and thousands of years ago, as it is now, and a couple of thousand years ago, as it was then. So if you take part in a Jewish feast, you're not just remembering what happened in the past, you're bringing the past into the present. You're making the present real now. So there was a Jewish feast to commemorate manna in the wilderness. Not a distant memory, but God's presence now. A reminder of how, if God had not fed them unexpectedly, when Moses was their leader in the wilderness, they would have died. A reminder that God provides and of their dependence on God. And when Jesus said at the Last Supper, "Do this in memory of me," the Greek word that he used for memory was a word that meant bringing the present into the future, or the past into the present, not looking back. He didn't tell us to look back, he told us to look forward to a life to come, a life that was bigger and stronger than the life we live now, that connected what had happened in the past to the future. The reason he offended the Jews, first of all, is that talking about his flesh sounded to them a bit like what we would call cannibalism. But worse than that, then he mentioned not only his flesh, but his blood. Jews aren't allowed to eat blood, even now. Do you know why? Because they thought that blood was the essence of life itself. It needed to be poured out. before meat was consumed. So when Jesus prepared his disciples for the Last Supper, he prepared them for his death, the destruction of his mortal flesh, but he also guaranteed them his eternal life in what we sometimes call precious blood. What is flesh is died, what is spirit lives forever. And as I said last week, this month, in this second year of the lectionary, we are reading Jesus' words to the crowd after he has fed them. They are sceptical, they challenge him, and they don't agree with much of what he said, or at least most of them don't. His disciples and a few others did, and they went on to become us, the church. I spoke too about the real present, so that's another way of talking about that. Jesus coming really into the midst of our lives in a new way to remake us. So just as a wedding ring is a sign of eternal love, a strip of metal that goes round and round, it lives forever, these tokens, consecrated bread and wine, are guarantees, a foretaste of heaven. When they finally revised the old prayer book in 1662, some of you will remember that, that's where you might have found that catechism, the instructions were very clear about Holy Communion. There'd been all sorts of arguments, as I said last week, in the Reformation about what the real presence meant. They were rediscovering it, but there were different positions, and Christians were arguing and squabbling, and the church was being divided because of it. But nonetheless, even though the Church of England then became a slightly more Protestant church because it was part of this Reformation, it said that if there's any bread or wine left over at the end of communion, you're not to throw it away, you're not to take it to the vicarage and use it, you are to reverently consume it, and if need be, ask some people to come forward and help if there's a lot of wine left over, even in those days before drinking and driving. A sign that somehow different Anglicans interpret it in slightly different ways of the essential importance and power of what it is we come to receive. Another argument at the Reformation was that agreement that the Eucharist, the thanksgiving for the body and blood, was important might mean that you do it more and more and more, and lots and lots and lots, or it might mean that you only do it when you're fully prepared for it, because of the power and the essential presence, sacramentally, of the divine life in what we consume. More than a rich metaphor, but certainly a rich metaphor. Christ's body broken, his blood poured out, but in the context of Jews looking for life in the new life that he brought for Christians. I'm not preaching the remaining sermons this August, so I look forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say for as long as we're going through the rest of the 6th chapter of John. But meanwhile, I'll leave you with a lovely post-communion prayer, which we tend to use midweek. It's rather long, so it won't fit on a Sunday order of service. It was tucked away in the alternative service book. Someone told me about it, and ages ago I learnt it. So I hope I can get it right now, because I've only written down a little bit of it. Father of all, we give you thanks and praise that when you were still far off, you met us in your Son and brought us home. Dying and living, he declared your life, gave us grace, and opened the gates of glory. May we who share Christ's body live his risen life. We who drink his cup bring life to others. We whom the Spirit lights give light to the world. Keep us firm in the hope you have set before us, so we and all your children shall be free, and the whole earth live to praise your name. Amen.